and crime, and it's an autobiography. I first picked it because I really like Trevor Noah. He's a comedian, political commentator, and I really like his humor. And yeah, so it was also a recommendation by a friend of mine. So if have you read? I mean, you haven't read this, but I think to give you some context, this is so it begins with the Immorality Act 1927. If you can just read about it, uh, so that basically it prohibited uh, sex between European males with native females of Africa. And if somebody was found doing that, it was considered an offense, which could lead to imprisonment also for about 5 years. So, so this is where how it begins, and yeah. So, run is the one second. So, part one. Let's begin reading. So, the genius of apartheid was convincing people who were the overwhelming majority to turn on each other. Apartheid is what it was. You separate people into groups and make them hate one another so you can run them all. At the time, black South Africans outnumbered white South Africans nearly 5 to 1. Yet we were divided into different tribes with different languages: Zulu, Xhosa, Swana, Sotho, Venda, Ndebele, Zonga, Pedi, and more. Okay, I may be mispronouncing some. I don't know the pronunciation of all these languages. These are African languages. Long before apartheid existed, these tribal factions clashed and warred with one another. Then white rule used that animosity to divide and conquer. All non-whites were systematically um, classified into various groups and subgroups. So the non-whites were divided by the whites into different groups, right? Then these groups were given differing levels of rights and privileges in order to keep them at odds. So yeah, it was just like a divide and rule, which was also practiced by the British in India, right? Perhaps the starkest of these divisions was between South Africa's two dominant groups, the and the Xhosa. The Zulu man is known as the warrior. He is proud. He puts his head down and fights. When the colonial armies invaded, the Zulu charged into battle with nothing but spears and shields against men with guns. The Zulu were slaughtered by the thousands, but they never stopped fighting. The Xhosa, on the other hand, pride themselves on being the thinkers. My mother is Xhosa. Nelson Mandela was Xhosa. The Xhosa waged a long war against the white man as well, but after experiencing the futility of battle against a better armed foe, many chiefs took a more nimble approach. These white people are here whether we like it or not, they said. Let's see what tools they possess that can be useful to us. Instead of being resistant to English, let's learn English. We'll understand what the white man is saying and we can force him to negotiate with us. So this is how the Xhosa people were thinking. The Zulu went to war with the white man. The Xhosa played chess with the white man. For a long time, neither was particularly successful, and each blamed the other for a problem neither had created. Bitterness festered. For decades, those feelings were held in check by a common enemy. So the enemy was common between these two groups. Then apartheid fell, Mandela walked free, and black South Africa went to war with itself. Okay. So, yeah, actually, now it begins, chapter one, which is called titled Run. Sometimes in big Hollywood movies, they'll have these crazy chase scenes where somebody jumps or gets thrown from a moving car. The person hits the ground and rolls for a bit. They then come to a stop and pop up and dust themselves off like it was no big deal. Whenever I see that, I think, that's rubbish. Getting thrown out of a moving car hurts way worse than that. I was 9 years old when my mother threw me out of a moving car. It happened on a Sunday. I know it was on a Sunday because we were coming home from church. And every Sunday in my childhood meant church. One second. We never missed church. One second. My mother was and still is a deeply religious woman, very Christian. Like indigenous peoples around the world, black South Africans adopted the religion of our colonizers. So, by adopt, I mean it was forced on us. Uh, so in Africa also, yeah, I mean religion was brought by the British, as it says here, Christianity. The white man was quite stern with the native. You need to pray to Jesus, he said. Jesus will save you. To which the native replied, well, we do need to be saved from you. But that's beside the point. So let's give this Jesus thing a shot. My whole family is religious, but where my mother was, Team Jesus all the way. My grandmother balanced her Christian faith with the traditional Hosa beliefs she'd grown up with, communicating with the spirits of our ancestors. So those were the traditional Hosa beliefs, praying to ancestors. For a long time, I didn't understand why so many black people had abandoned their indigenous faith for Christianity. But the more we went to church and the longer I sat in those pews, the more I learned about how Christianity works. If you're Native American and you pray to your ancestors, you're a primitive. But when white people pray to a guy who turns water into wine, well, that's just common sense. My childhood involved church or some form of church at least 4 nights a week. Tuesday night was the prayer meeting, Wednesday night was Bible study, Thursday night was youth church, Friday and Saturday we had off. Time to sin. Then on Sunday we went to church. Three churches to be precise. The reason we went to three churches was because my mom said each church gave her something different. The first church offered jubilant praise of the Lord. Um, the second church offered deep analysis of the scripture, which my mom loved. The third church offered passion and catharsis. It was a place where you truly felt the presence of the Holy Spirit inside you. Completely by coincidence, as we moved back and forth between these churches, I noticed that each one had its own distinct racial makeup. Jubilant Church was mixed church, Analytical Church was white church, and Passionate Church was the black church. Mixed church was Rema Bible Church. Rema was one of those huge, super modern, suburban mega churches. The pastor, Ray McCauley, was an ex bodybuilder with a big smile and the personality of a cheerleader. Pastor Ray had completed in the 1974 Mr. Universe competition. He placed third. The winner that year was Arnold Schwartz. Okay, it's a tongue twister for me.
Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, Schwarzenegger. Yeah, whatever. Every week, Ray would be up on stage working really hard to make Jesus cool. There was arena style seating and a rock band jamming out with the latest Christian contemporary pop. Everyone sang along, and if you didn't know the words, that was okay because they were all right up there on the jumbotron for you. It was like Christian karaoke basically. I always had a blast at mixed church. White Church was Rosebank Union in Santon, a very white and wealthy part of Johannesburg. I loved White Church because I didn't actually have to go to the main service. My mom would go to that, and I would go to the youth side to Sunday school. In Sunday school, we got to read cool stories. Noah and the flood was obviously a favorite. I had a personal stake there, but I also loved the stories about Moses parting the Red Sea, David slaying Goliath, Jesus whipping the changers in the temple. I grew up in a home with very little exposure to popular culture. Boys to men were not allowed in my mother's house. Songs about some guy grinding on a girl all night long. No, no, no. That was forbidden. I'd hear the other kids at school singing End of the Road, and I'd have no clue what was going on. I knew of these boys to men, but I didn't really know who they were. The only music I knew was from church, soaring, uplifting songs praising Jesus. It was the same with movies. My mom didn't want my mind polluted by movies with sex and violence. So the Bible was my action movie. Samson was my superhero. He was my He Man. A guy beating 1,000 people to death with the jawbone of a donkey? That's pretty badass. Eventually, you get to Paul writing letters to the Ephesians, and it loses the plot. But the Old Testament and the Gospels, I could quote you anything from those pages, chapters, and verses. There were Bible games, quizzes every week at White Church, and I kicked everyone's ass. Then there was Black Church. There was always some kind of Black Church service going on somewhere, and we tried them all. In the township, that typically meant an outdoor tent revival style church. We usually went to my grandmother's church, an old school Methodist congregation, 500 African grannies in blue and white blouses, clutching their Bibles and patiently burning in the hot African sun. Black church was rough, I won't lie. No air conditioning, no lyrics up on jumbotrons, and it lasted forever, 3 or 4 hours at least, which confused me because White Church was only like an hour in and out. Thanks for coming. But at Black Church, I would sit there for what felt like eternity, trying to figure out why time moved so slowly. Is it possible for time to actually stop? If so, why does it stop at Black Church and not at White Church? I eventually decided black people needed more time with Jesus because we suffered more. I'm here to fill up my blessings for the week. My mother used to say. The more time we spent at church, she reckoned, the more blessings we accrued. Like a Starbucks rewards card. Black Church had one saving grace. If I could make it to the third or fourth hour, I'd get to watch the pastor cast demons out of people. People possessed by demons would start running up and down the aisles like madmen, screaming in tongues. The ushers would tackle them, like bouncers at a club, and hold them down for the pastor. The pastor would grab their heads and violently shake them back and forth, shouting, I cast out this spirit in the name of Jesus. Some pastors were more violent than others, but what they all had in common was that they wouldn't stop until the demon was powerful, until the demon was gone and the congregant had gone limp and collapsed on the stage. The person had to fall. Because if he didn't fall, that meant the demon was powerful and the pastor needed to come at him even harder. You could be a linebacker in the NFL. Didn't matter. That pastor was taking you down. Good lord, that was fun. So, yeah, this is him describing all that he saw at church. Christian karaoke, bad action stories, and violent faith healers. Man, I loved church. The thing I didn't love was the lengths we had to go in order to get to church. It was an epic slog. We lived in Eden Park, a tiny suburb way outside Johannesburg. It took us an hour to get to White Church, another 40 minutes to get to Mixed Church, and another 45 minutes to drive out to Soweto for Black Church. Then, if that wasn't bad enough, some Sundays we'd double back to White Church for a special evening service. By the time we finally got home at night, I'd collapse into bed. My battery is low. Let me check कितना चलेगा. ठीक है. It's charging. So yeah, so he's just now describing how long it took. By the time we finally we finally got home at night, I'd collapsed into bed. This particular Sunday, the Sunday I was hurled from a moving car, started out like any other Sunday. My mother woke up, made me porridge for breakfast. I took my bath while she dressed my baby brother, Andrew, who was 9 months old. Then we went out to the driveway. But once we were finally out, all strapped in and ready to go, the car wouldn't start. My mom had this ancient, broken down, bright tangerine Volkswagen Beetle that she next picked up for next to nothing. The reason she got it for next to nothing was because it was always breaking down. To the to this day, I hate second-hand cars. Almost everything that's ever gone wrong in my life, I can trace back to a second-hand car. Second-hand cars made me get detention for being late for school. Second-hand cars left us hitchhiking on the side of the freeway. A second-hand car was also the reason my mom got married. If it hadn't been for the Volkswagen that didn't work, we never would have looked at a mechanic who became the husband, who became the stepfather, who became the man who tortured us for years and put a bullet in the back of my mother's head. I'll take the new car with the warranty every time. As much as I loved church, the idea of a 9 hour slog from mixed church to white church to black church, then doubling back to white church again, was just too much to contemplate. It was bad enough in a car, but taking public transport would be twice as long as hard. When the Volkswagen refused to start, inside my head I was praying, please say we'll just stay home. Please say we'll just stay home. Then I glanced over to see the determined look on my mother's face, her jaw set, and I knew I had a long day ahead of me. Come, she said, we're going to catch minibuses. Yeah. Can you hear me by the way? With this fan ka sound
Mhm.
is.
Yeah, I can hear you.
My mother is as stubborn as she is religious. Once her mind's made up, that's it. Indeed, obstacles that would normally lead a person to change their plans, like a car breaking down, only made her more determined to forge ahead. It's the devil, she said about the stalled car. The devil doesn't want us to go to church. That's why we've got to catch minibuses. Whenever I found myself up against my mother's faith based obst- obstinacy, I would try as respectfully as possible to counter with an opposing point of view. Or, I said, the Lord knows that today we shouldn't go to church, which is why He made sure the car wouldn't start, so that we stay at home as a family and take a day of rest. Because even the Lord rested. Ah, that's the devil talking, Trevor. No, because Jesus is in control, and if Jesus is in control and we pray to Jesus, he would let the car start. But he hasn't. Therefore, no, Trevor. Sometimes Jesus puts obstacles in your way to see if you overcome them. Like Job, this could be a test. Ah, yes, mom, but the test could be to see if you're willing to accept what has happened and stay at home and praise Jesus for his wisdom. No, that's the devil talking. Now you go change your clothes. But, mom, Trevor, so there's something in African, I think it's Sinkela. Sinkela is a phrase with many shades of meaning. It says, don't undermine me, don't underestimate me, and just try me. It's a command and a threat all at once. It's a common thing for Rosa parents to say to their kids. Anytime I heard it, I knew it meant the conversation was over. And if I uttered another word, I was in for a hiding. What we call a spanking. Yeah, so uh, I think it's a. I mean, basically, so yeah, he's begun to describe his relationship with his mom and things he would do with her. At the time, I attended a private Catholic school called Maryvale College. I was the champion of the Maryvale Sports Day every single year, and my mother won the mom's trophy every single year. Why? Because she was always chasing me to kick my ass, and I was always running not to get my ass kicked. Nobody ran like me and my mom. She wasn't one of those. Come over here and get your hiding. She wasn't one of those types. She delivered it to you free of charge. She was a thrower too. Whatever was next to her was coming at you. If it was something breakable, I had to catch it and put it down. If it broke, that would be my fault too. And the ass kicking would be that much worse. If she threw a uh, if she threw a vase at me, I'd have to catch it, put it down, and then run. In a split second, I'd have to think: is it valuable? Yes. Is it breakable? Yes. Catch it and put it down and run. So yeah, he was getting beatings from his mom. We had a very Tom and Jerry relationship, me and my mom. She was the strict disciplinarian. I was naughty as shit. She would send me out to buy groceries, and I wouldn't come right home because I'd be using the change from the milk and bread to play arcade games at the supermarket. I loved video games. I was a master at Street Fighter. I could go forever on a single play. I'd drop a coin in, time would fly, and the next thing I knew, there'd be a woman behind me with a belt. It was a race. I'd take off out the door and through the dusty streets of Eden Park, clambering over walls, ducking through backyards. It was a normal thing in our neighborhood. Everybody knew that Trevor child would come through like a bat out of hell, and his mom would be right there behind him. She could go at a full sprint in high heels. But if she really wanted to come after me, she had this thing where she'd kick her shoes off and while still going at top speed. While still going at top speed. She'd do this weird move with her ankles and the heels would go flying and she wouldn't even miss a step. That's when I knew, okay, she's in turbo mode now. When I was a little when I was little, she always caught me, but as I got older, I got faster. And when speed failed her, she'd use her wits. If it was about to get away, if I was about to get away, she'd yell, "Stop, thief!" She'd do this to her own child. In South Africa, nobody gets involved in other people's business unless it's mob justice, and then everybody wants in. So she'd yell, "Thief!" knowing it would bring the whole neighborhood out against me. And then I'd have strangers trying to grab me and tackle me, and I'd have to duck and dive and dodge them as well, all the while screaming, I am not a thief, I'm her son. The last thing I wanted to do that Sunday was climb into some crowded minibus, but the second I heard my mom say Senkela, I knew my fate was sealed. She gathered up Andrew, and we climbed out the Volkswagen and went out to try to catch a ride. I was 5 years old, nearly six, when Nelson Mandela released from prison. I remember seeing it on TV and everyone being happy. I didn't know why we were being happy, just that we were. I was aware of the fact that there was a thing called apartheid and it was ending, and that was a big deal. But I didn't understand the intricacies of it. What I do remember, what I will never forget, is the violence that followed. Oops. I, did the screen black out right now? For me, it did. Okay, maybe it's. I don't know why it's. मेरा laptop में it's fine, right? It didn't. ठीक है. What I do remember, what I will never forget, is the violence that followed. The triumph of democracy over apartheid is sometimes called the bloodless revolution. It is called that because very little white blood was spilled. Black blood ran in the streets. As the apartheid regime fell, we knew that the black man was now going to rule. The question was, which black man? Spades of violence broke out between the Inkatha Freedom Party and the ANC, the African National Congress, as they jockeyed for power. The political dynamic between these two groups was very complicated, but the simplest way to understand it is as a proxy war between Zulu and Xhosa. The Inkatha was predominantly Zulu, very militant and very nationalistic. The ANC was a broad coalition encompassing many different tribes, but its leader at the time was primarily Xhosa. Instead of uniting for peace, they turned on one another, committing acts of unbelievable savagery. Massive riots broke out. Thousands of people were killed. Necklacing was common. That's where people would hold someone down and put a rubber tire over his torso, pinning his arms. Then they'd douse him with petrol and set him on fire and burn him alive. The ANC did it to the Inkatha. Inkatha did it to the ANC. I saw one of those charred bodies on the side of the road one day on my way to school. In the evenings, my mom and I would turn on our little black and white TV and watch the news. A dozen people killed, 50 people killed, 100 people killed. Eden Park sat not far from the sprawling townships of the East Rand. From the East Rand, Hokoza and Cattlehong, which were the sites of some of the most horrific Inkatha ANC clashes. Once a month at least, we'd drive home and the neighborhood would be on fire. Hundreds of rioters in the street. My mom would edge the car slowly through the crowds and around blockades made of flaming tires. Nothing burns like a tire. It rages with a fury you can't imagine. As we drove past the burning blockades, it felt like we were inside an oven. I used to say to my mom, I think Satan burns tires in hell. Whenever the riots broke out, all our neighbors would wisely hole up behind closed doors. But not my mom. She'd head straight out, and we'd inch our way past the blockades. She'd give the rioters this look: let me pass, I'm not involved in this shit. She was unwavering in the face of danger. That always amazed me. It didn't matter that there was a war on our doorstep, she had things to do, places to be. It was the same stubbornness that kept her going to church despite a broken down car. There could be 500 rioters with a blockade of burning tires on the main road out of Eden Park. And my mother would say, "Get dressed, I've got to go to work. You've got to go to school." "But aren't you afraid?" I'd say. "There's only one of you, and there's so many of them." "Honey, I'm not alone," she'd say. "I've got all of heaven's angels behind me." "Well, it would be nice if we could see them," I'd say, "because I don't think the writers know they're there." She'd tell me not to worry. She always came back to the phrase she lived by: "If God is with me, who can be against me?" She was never scared, even when she would have, even if she would have been. Okay, so that's it.